Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. Sorry, that was my dog. I'm continuing my coverage of the Burning Crusade Classic here. In the last guide we did classes, so now we're doing the races. I'm gonna do things a bit more casually this time around. In my vanilla video, I did a quote best list for both PvE and PvP for each and every class. This time I'm just gonna list out each racial and how they've changed from vanilla to BC, and give some comments on their use in the context of the Burning Crusade, which is important because it's not only the racials that are changing, but it's also that environment. A good example is that Arena is the new big PvP endgame activity, so as you'd imagine, in the realm of PvP, some racials become stronger or weaker in these enclosed and line-of-sight filled environments. Another important change is the fact that you'll now be fighting your own faction. Battlegrounds remain to be Alliance versus Horde, but for Arena, you can have Alliance versus Alliance and Horde versus Horde. I think in vanilla, in PvP in particular, a lot of players chose their faction not necessarily for the racials they have, but also for the racials that they didn't have to fight against. The classic example is the Warlock. Tell me, do you want to play a Warlock where 50% of your enemies have a 5-second immunity fear breaker? Or do you want to play a Warlock where 50% of your enemies have increased sword skill? And it's the same with rogues and the orc stun resist, and many more examples I'm sure. The point being is, now in the endgame PvP, you have to learn how to deal with Escape Artist as Alliance, and Will of the Forsaken is Horde, so if Arena is your main focus, that's a big thing to consider, I think. It's an important choice regardless. Remember, the race change service came out during Wrath, so what you pick at the character creation screen is what you're stuck with, so it's worth investigating. You don't want to be in a situation where you hit 70 and you're attuned to everything, and you're like, damn, if I had known that X race was so good at Y activity, I would have picked them. This video is obviously more for the min-max crowd. There are those who pick races for looks, and that's fine. And there are those who want to eke out every advantage on their characters, which is also fine. This video is more tailored for the latter crowd, as you'll see. And one last thing before we begin is that each of these races have different base stats. I personally think that these are pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about these racials. Like as a human warrior, I can't tell you how many times I got into Frost Nova, and I wish I picked Gnome for that Escape Artist. It wasn't, ah darn, I wish I had 2 more strength. But I figure that they're important to some people, so I'll have that linked in the description for you. But starting off with the new stuff first, since that's what everyone's interested in, I'm sure. The Burning Crusade, of course, holds 2 new races. That's the Draenei for the Alliance, and the Blood Elves for the Horde. We're starting off pretty strong here, because Blood Elves have amazing PvP racials for the Horde. They're important though, because they give Horde access to the Paladin class. And aside from that, they have 2 actives, the first being Mana Tap, which is an instant cast 30-yard range spell. It burns a pretty small amount of mana on your target, and gives you a charge of arcane energy, which we'll cover in a bit. This is a nifty little racial which doesn't sound super great at first, but it can be a lifesaver. In PvP, you can keep someone in combat so they don't shrink or re-stealth. It's particularly useful for paladins since they only have that one ranged attack, the Avenger's Shield, which is nice, but it's on a cooldown, and with its dazing property, it can split up packs and make things messy. Their second racial, however, is where it's at. That's Arcane Tauren, which is an 8-yard, 2-second AoE silence, restoring your primary resource based on how many charges of arcane energy you have from that mana tap, and it has a 2-minute cooldown. Its power in PvP is pretty self-explanatory, I think. It's incredibly strong, especially since silence isn't on the DR in the Burning Crusade. And for PvE, a nice little way to gather things up. With paladins having their time in the spotlight, especially in dungeons, this is going to be incredibly useful for pulling everything into your Consecrate. Most of the original races all have their own minor resist boost. Gnomes have Arcane, Dwarves Frost. Well, Blood Elves get all of it. Their Magic Resistance passive increases all resistances by 5. And Arcane Affinity just increases their enchanting skill by 10. Nothing else to say about that really. It saves you some gold on leveling enchanting, I guess. So, an AoE silence with resource generation, a ranged pull, bit of resistance, but those are seen as incredibly powerful in PvP in particular. But next, we have our blueberry counterpart, and that's the Draenei. The Draenei, of course, give Alliance access to the Shaman class, and they have some interesting bonuses. Their active is called Gift of the Naru, which is 40-yard range, 1.5 second cast time, and it heals the target for a pretty small amount over 15 seconds at a 3-minute cooldown. In current, this isn't bad because it's instant cast, it's off the GCD, and it's percentage based, which makes it scale really well. But in BC, it has that cast time, it's a magic effect, which limits it for PvP, and the heal itself just isn't very strong. It's nice to have, but it just has a lot of drawbacks. Many people instead choose them for their passive, which is Inspiring/Heroic Presence, which gives a hit percentage to yourself and party members, depending on your class. If you're Shaman, it's spell hit, if you're Hunter, it's physical hit, and so on. They also get 10 extra shadow resistance, which is important, lots of shadow damage in the Burning Crusade. And lastly, they get 5 more points in the new jewel crafting profession. So, an extra heal over time, free hit percentage, some shadow resistance. In my opinion, overall, it's more of a PvE race due to the gift's cast time and susceptibility to dispels. They have their place for sure, and people like them for that extra stat. It makes them nice to have in the party, that's for sure. So, these are the 2 new races in a nutshell. You may have noticed that I didn't mention the Seal of Blood. Don't worry, I'm saving the class-specific stuff like that and priest racials for the end of the video, so if you're a pally or priest, stay tuned. For now though, we'll just continue along with the Superior Alliance. Gnomes are next on the list. Your active is still Escape Artist, which removes a slow or a root, but it got a buff in the Burning Crusade because it's now instant cast. As you may know in vanilla, it does have a 0.5 second cast time, which doesn't sound too bad, but it's actually super annoying. You can't use it while moving, it resets your swing timer, you can't dodge or parry while casting it. It does have a trade-off though, and that's the fact that it has a longer cooldown now, at 1 minute and 45 seconds, as opposed to just 1 minute in vanilla. It's incredibly useful for both PvE and PvP. I'd say PvP more for any class really. Anything to close or widen that gap is going to be incredibly useful. They retain their Expansive Mind talent, which is a 5% bonus to their intellect stat. And just like in vanilla, this isn't just base intellect. This racial works with all of your gear, buffs, and everything, so it's quite powerful. And they also retain their 10 arcane resistance. It might get you an odd sheep resist here and there. And lastly, gnomes are better engineers, gaining 15 points in their profession. One last thing I'd like to mention is that they do have a hidden racial. Contrary to what the ladies tell me, size does matter, and the gnome's small stature gives you the advantage of keeping a low profile. It's natural instinct, I think, if you're in a big PvP battle, for people to target the biggest thing on the screen. Obviously, people who know what they're doing won't do that. They'll look at classes and gear and whatnot, but I can tell you from experience in general PvP, you do get targeted less as a gnome. Obfuscating anything is going to give you an advantage. That's why people pop Noggin Fogger and other appearance-altering items. Tell me, what's harder to fight, this or this? If you don't immediately know what you're targeting, it's going to make you hesitate and put you on your back foot, and the same goes with size. It's definitely a min-max thing, but hey, Classic is a min-max community, so important to mention, I thought. It does come with its downsides. You get dismounted in water easier, and certain jumps are harder as a gnome, which may or may not be a big deal to you. So overall, in my opinion, gnomes will be one of the most prolific races in the Burning Crusade. It's the PvPer's expansion with Arena and all that, and Escape Artist is just too good for any class. And that intellect buff is great for every area of the game, so it's just a great choice all around. Next, we have the Human. Their active is still Perception, which gives you big stealth detection for 20 seconds at a 3-minute cooldown. No changes with the racial itself, but this is where that change in environment thing comes in, like I mentioned at the start of the video. Like I said, Arena is the big PvP activity now, and Perception is way more useful than it was in vanilla, since you're going into these smaller enclosed arenas. It's much easier to find people with it, and denying a rogue's opener or catching a druid early is extremely helpful. Especially considering how represented these classes will be. Tons of rogues and druids in all brackets, so Even though the spell is the same, it's more powerful in Burning Crusade due to the more advantageous environment. And another thing is consumes and gadgets are limited in Arena. In Vanilla, you can just Cat's Eye Elixir and Goggle, which is powerful enough to find stealthers. But you can't use that stuff in Arena, at least in 2.4.3, so comparatively, it's more powerful in that aspect as well. They do have an actual technical change with their weapon skill, however, and it's tied to the expertise stat. Previously, you'd get +5 weapon skill to maces and swords, which increases your hit, reduces glancing blows, and so on. Expertise, however, is a new stat introduced in patch 2.3 that reduces your target's chances to parry and dodge you, just like weapon skill. Keep in mind as well that it's +5 expertise and not expertise rating. Remember, Burning Crusade is also when they introduced the rating system for more finely tuned gear. For example, 14 crit rating is 1 crit, and 5 expertise would be around 20 expertise rating. It's still handy, but not as strong as it was in Vanilla. In Vanilla, you have people using level 44 mail gloves over an Exramus gear with how powerful and scarce weapon skill is in PvE, and you don't see stuff like that with expertise in BC, partly because whereas in Vanilla, weapon skill was so few and far between, it's all over the place in the Burning Crusade. Bonus stats are bonus stats though, and you'll still get an edge over other players. Diplomacy is still the same. It's a 10% increased reputation to all reputation gained. I think that many would argue that this is more useful in the Burning Crusade since it's such a reputation-dependent expansion. You'll be rep grinding until your eyeballs fall out, so this is more useful in BC than Vanilla, I think. The only downside is that when you finish all of your reputations, it's essentially a dead racial, unless you carry that tune into Wrath Classic, if Blizzard ends up making that. The human spirit received a buff. In Vanilla, this gave 5% spirit, and in BC, it's 10%. And just like the Gnomes intellect boost, this works with your gear and everything. Spirit is as useful as it was in Vanilla, even more so if you consider the Discipline Priest's improved Divine Spirit, which increases the recipient's spell damage and healing by an amount equal to 10% of their spirit. So humans are a good all-around race, having bonuses that benefit nearly every activity. Stealthers will learn to hate you in PvP, you won't have to worry about expertise as much, some extra regen from spirit, and faster rep grinders. And they also have the coolest animations too, so there's that. The Hairy and Hearty Dwarves are next on our list. Viagra is off the table, as Stoneform is still their active. It's a 3-minute cooldown skill that removes and grants immunity to all bleeds, poisons, and diseases for 8 seconds, and gives some bonus armor. It's great for all areas of the game. Rogues in particular hate fighting dwarves because they can clear off crippling and bleeds. A nerf though is that you can't clear blinds anymore, since it's no longer considered a poison. And PvE as well, of course. Just bring a raid of dwarves and turn Moros into easy mode. They also have gun specialization, which increases their chance to crit with guns by 1%. In Vanilla, this was weapon skill with guns, but it kinda sucked since ranged attacks couldn't glance, and the best weapons were bows and crossbows anyways. But in BC, it's a little better, and there are some good guns, typically early game, where you'd see some use out of this racial. Endgame is still mainly bows or crossbows though. Find treasure marks chests and whatnot on your minimap. Pretty straightforward. You'll catch some chests that you otherwise would have missed. And lastly, they have +10 to frost resistance, which is also unchanged from Vanilla. There are a ton of frost mages in BC, don't you worry, so this might save you from a Nova every now and then. In my opinion, it's another good all-around race. More appealing for hunters, obviously, with that increased crit chance with guns. PvE or PvP, Stoneform will save your butt a lot, so either way, you can't go wrong. The last alliance race on our list is the Night Elf. Shadow Meld is the active, unchanged from Vanilla. This gives you a stationary stealth on a 10-second cooldown, not usable in combat, and rogues and druids get a bit of a stealth boost. You can argue that this is more useful in BC for Arena, since mana regeneration is so important, and if you're able to get away, you can drink and eat up, and then pop Shadow Meld for a stealthy recovery. Letting a Night Elf get away from you in Arena is really bad. They do retain their passive, Quickness, which gives you 1% dodge. It's nice for everyone, of course, a bit more for tanks. And Wisp is unchanged. When dead, you gain a 50% movement speed boost, so if dying is your specialty, there you go. And lastly, they do retain their 10 nature resistance. Cyclone is a nature spell, so you can maybe catch a resist here and there. They have their place, just like all these races. I don't really care for them too much, because for my gameplay, which is more PvP oriented, I just like the other races for their available classes more. For Warrior and Rogue, I want to be Gnome for that mobility. For Hunter, I want to be Dwarf for stone form and free wins against rogues. That's just my 2 cents though, really. No offense to all of you Night Elf high DPS warriors out there. Moving on to the Horde here, we have the Orc. Quite a few changes with this race from Vanilla to BC. First, covering their active Blood Fury. In Vanilla, this was a base 25% melee attack power increase for 15 seconds, and a 50% healing reduction for 25 seconds at a 2-minute cooldown. It's much better in BC though, because it now changes with your class. Spell damage and healing for Warlock, attack power for Warrior, Rogue, and Hunter, and both for the Shaman. And what's more, the duration of the healing debuff was reduced to 15 seconds. So it's just a nice active here. You pop this along with your trinkets for some big DPS. Just be careful in PvP obviously. And next we do have a straight nerf with their hardiness racial. There must have been a developer who played Rogue, because in Vanilla this is 25% resist to stuns, and in BC they trimmed it down to 15%. It's still good, stuns are just as important in BC as they are in Vanilla, it's just not completely broken anymore. And their axe specialization shares the same changes with the human sword and mace specs. It's been switched on over to expertise instead of weapon skill. It's a nice boost, but not as impactful as it was in Vanilla due to the prolificacy of expertise in the game. Their command racial is still the same, 5% increased pet damage for hunters and warlocks. Particularly in the case of hunters, this is way better in BC than it was in Vanilla. In Vanilla, as you know by now, if you played a hunter, your pets are made out of peanut brittle. You send them in on a boss, and very often they'll just die from incidental AoE damage. In the Burning Crusade, however, all hunter pets gain the Avoidance skill, which reduces AoE damage taken by 50%. They're not immortal by any means, but it's a huge difference, so this racial by extension is more useful since your pet is actually alive more. And combine that with the fact that pets now scale with you as you gear up, and the high damage of the Beast Mastery tree in general, if this flew under your radar in Vanilla, definitely reconsider it for BC. Overall, it's just a strong race. They're not as good as they were in PvP in Vanilla with that hardiness nerf in my opinion, unless you're a hunter because the other racials kind of balance out, but still very strong in all aspects of the game. Moving on over to our next race, we have the Tauren. Their active ability is War Stomp, which stuns up to 5 enemies within 8 yards for 2 seconds at a 0.5 second cast and a 2-minute cooldown. Just a great talent all around for PvE and PvP. There are a lot of combos that you can do with it. War Stomp into Entangling Root. In Rogue vs Warrior, the rogue wants to use evasion due to Overpower's long cooldown, but Tauren can counter that and follow up with the War Stomps since you of course can't dodge while stunned. Endurance gives you 5% increased total health, unchanged. Note that this is all health, including anything on your gear and from talents, similar to the previous racials we've gone over. Very powerful, more so for PvP since you need every bit of health that you can get. And they also keep that 10 nature resistance passive. Just like Night Elves, not much to say there. It can help. And lastly, they have those bonus 15 points to Herbalism. Another hidden racial here relates to my discussion on Gnomes earlier, except on the opposite end of the spectrum. Tauren, due to their size, assuming no body morphing items, can be at a disadvantage since people are more likely to target the biggest thing on their screen. Again, this won't really be a problem in high-end competitive arena since adept players will of course actually use their brains, but for general world PvP or casual battlegrounds, this might serve as an annoyance. An actual positive hidden racial though is their increased range. Due to their massive size, Tauren get a little bit extra range to their attacks. This itself is unchanged in BC from Vanilla, but there are some differences still. For one, during patch 2.3, the minimum range for ranged attacks for hunters was reduced, which removed their dead zone. This increased range works both ways. You can reach further, but you're also easier to reach, so In vanilla, Tauren hunters struggled a bit more at kiting enemies because of that, so that's not as punishing in BC due to the removed dead zone. And example 2 is many arena players know that this racial gives a huge advantage in arena. Line of sight is extremely important in these arenas, and each one of them has some sort of pillar or object to hide behind, or else ranged would just completely dominate. In the original run, before this hidden racial was removed, Tauren could actually swing through the pillars due to that increased range. Particularly in the case of warriors and that mace stun, it was incredibly powerful, and a lot of warriors are planning on rerolling Tauren for that alone. However, and although we won't know until we get the beta and everything, I would hold off on that for now. PvP in the original beta in the game was extremely clunky because, due to players' poor connection at the time, where you were on your screen isn't where you were on the server. There was a delay since we're all on dial-up, and it was manageable in PvE, but in PvP where you had 2 players circling around each other, it was awful. You would be right on top of your target, and they would still be out of range somehow. So to fix this, Blizzard implemented the leeway system, which, appropriately named, gave you some leeway to your melee attacks and abilities, and give you a little bit extra range to compensate for the lag so you can actually hit other players. The issue is that it's now 2021, and everyone's connections are way better. You no longer get kicked off of the computer when your mom picks up the phone, but the leeway system is unchanged, and as a result, this is even acknowledged by Blizzard, throughout all of Classic's lifespan so far, everyone has a little bit extra range than they should, as the system is overcompensated for current connections. It's my belief, if it remains unchanged, that it won't be just Tauren who can reach through the pillars, but every race. Again, we only really know until the beta is out, and I suggest you research this, as this video was made before then. Get your Linkin Park albums ready. The next race on our list is Undead. Will of the Forsaken breaks and grants immunity to Charm, Fear, and Sleep for 5 seconds at a 2-minute cooldown, unchanged from vanilla. Mainly a PvP racial here, but you'll use it pretty often in PvE as well. For PvP though, it's as good as ever. I guess you can make some arguments that because Arena is more micromanaged, in the sense that you can't use mind control caps or magic dust, that you have less stuff to use it on. I think it balances out though, because you'll see things like mind control more often in these small skirmishes. It's just amazing. Enough said. Cannibalize is unchanged. 35% total health restored over 10 seconds when eating a human or undead corpse with a 2-minute cooldown. It's a nice little way to regenerate health. Obviously any damage will break the effect, so it's more useful in classes that have reliable crowd control, such as the mage or warlock, rogue. And undead players also have the ability to stay underwater longer before drowning. 3 times longer in fact. It's not as useful in the Burning Crusade, since there aren't as many underwater quests as there were in vanilla. I guess zoning into Serpent Shrine is a bit easier. It's a nice little PvP spot for undead, I guess. But other than that, not much else to say. And they do also retain their shadow resistance passive, providing a bit more resist than other races. So again, definitely a PvP oriented race here, and it really depends on who you fear more. If you really hate warlocks and priests, you're going to want to roll undead, and if you hate rogues, maybe you want to go orc instead for that stun resist. I wouldn't blame anyone for going undead because you're going to see a ridiculous amount of warlocks in the Burning Crusade, way more than in vanilla. They're seen as being, quote, the best in PvP, and in PvE they deal massive damage. Very prolific, so there's no question that you'll win a ton of fights that you otherwise wouldn't have if you choose undead. The last race on our list is the Troll. Their active berserking is unchanged. It's a 10 to 30% attack speed increase, costing your primary resource, and the value of attack speed increases the more hurt you are. I mentioned in my vanilla video that people undervalue this, and I still believe that. It really depends on your class, of course. Hunters and mages can run into situations where they're low health, but they get away due to their slipperiness, and get a huge benefit out of this. But for a warrior, for instance, that's definitely harder since you're not as mobile, and you don't have as many escape mechanisms. But even still, if it's the 10% minimum, it's definitely noticeable, and it can save you. Their throwing specialization was one of the joke racials in vanilla, providing increased skill to throwable weapons. Much like the Dwarves' gun specialization, this was changed to crit, which is still largely useless for every class but the Rogue. The Rogue gets the Deadly Throw ability in the Burning Crusade, which is a ranged combat point spender that requires throwing weapons, so you get an extra crit with that. And the same is true with their bow specialization. In BC, it's another crit. The legendary Thoradal is a bow, so if that's what you're shooting for, this synergizes well. Beast slaying is unchanged, 5% increased damage to beasts. The only beast bosses in the Burning Crusade are the Lurker below, and I think the Zul'Gurub bosses when they switch to their animal form, although I can't find any confirmation on that. So don't put this one on a pedestal. It's nice for a grind spot that involves beasts, and killing hunter pets in PvP I guess. And last, and definitely least, we have Regeneration, which increases your health regeneration rate by 10% and allows 10% to persist through combat. This was the joke racial in vanilla, and it's still true for the Burning Crusade, so consider this one a dud, other than the fact that it birthed this meme. So, those are all the races and racials of the Burning Crusade. As I mentioned, I did also want to cover priests and paladins, since they also get some race-specific or faction-specific abilities and perks. This will depend on how they do TBC Classic, as this was patch 2.3, but the coveted Fear Ward ability was deemed to be too powerful to be restricted to just Dwarves and Draenei. It was made to be baseline for every priest in the game, and in exchange for the races that used to have it, you got a spell called Chastise. Fear Ward, though, as you may know, gives your target immunity to the next fear, which is amazing for all areas of the game really, more so in PvP I think, although do note that it is dispellable, and it did also get a nerf when it became available to every priest in 2.3. Previously it had a 10-minute duration and a 30-second cooldown. That was changed to a 3-minute duration and cooldown. Chastise itself is pretty good too. It deals some light instant holy damage, and it roots a target for 2 seconds, so a nice little ability here for trying to get away from enemies. The Draenei also get Symbol of Hope, which regenerates mana to all party members. Nearly 1,000 at level 70, which is quite a lot. Here's the Burning Crusade's mana potion for comparison. And Dwarves and humans get Desperate Prayer, which is an instant cast self-heal with a 10-minute cooldown. So a nice little lifesaver here. Humans get Feedback, which burns a very small amount of mana and deals the same damage to enemies who hit you with the spell. It's kind of a meme really, but you can use it as Dispel Protection I guess. And in case you were wondering, it doesn't proc Blackout unfortunately. It is shadow damage, but it's technically a discipline spell. And Night Elves get Star Shards, which got a nice buff in 2.3. Beforehand it was a channeled spell, but post 2.3 it's a straight up dot. And because it's of the Arcane School, it can be cast in shadow form, so think of it as a mini Shadow Word Pain. Again, only post 2.3 though, so it'll depend on how Blizzard does things here. Elun's Grace got a big buff as well. Previously it just reduced range damage taken and increased dodge, but now it's just a flat 20% hit reduction from melee and ranged attacks, so really nice defensive ability here. Plus the cooldown has been knocked down. But moving on to the Horde here, we have Consume Magic for Blood Elves. This is an interesting little ability. It dispels a beneficial pre-spell off of yourself in exchange for a bit of mana. So you run throw in a rank 1 renew or something, and get a bit of mana back. And it has a 2-minute cooldown. They also get the Touch of Weakness, which deals a very small amount of shadow damage to a melee attacker, and reduces the damage caused by that person for 2 minutes. And it is consumed once the debuff goes off. It's not amazing, but it can proc Blackout unlike Feedback, so it can be handy. The Undead race also get Touch of Weakness, and more importantly Devouring Plague, which deals some pretty heavy shadow damage over 24 seconds and heals you for the damage done at a 3-minute cooldown. Here's the damage of your Shadow Word Pain just for reference. It's almost like a second version of it, except it heals you. It does have a pretty harsh mana cost, but unless it's cleaned you can really pile on the damage with this. And lastly for priests, we have the Troll. 2 unique spells for them. The Hex of Weakness, which reduces their damage caused, and reduces heals by 20% for 2 minutes. This is a curse, and one of the very few healing debuffs in the game, which gives a great value. And Shadow Guard is your priest lightning shield basically. When struck, you deal a little bit of shadow damage at 3 charges. The damage is pretty negligible, but its ability to proc Blackout isn't. Another undervalued racial here I think. I did mention that Paladins had some race-specific stuff. Well, more faction-specific stuff really, and you'll know all about this if you watch my class picking guide, so I hope you don't mind the copy-paste job here. In short, there are 2 seals in the Burning Crusade that are unique to each faction. The Alliance gets Seal of Vengeance, which puts on a stacking dot, with the Judgment dealing holy damage increasing per stack. Blood Elves, on the other hand, get Seal of Blood, which causes attacks to deal an additional 35% weapon damage as holy damage at the cost of health, and the Judgment to deal holy damage, which also deals some damage to the Paladin. If you've researched even a little bit of Paladins in the Burning Crusade, you know that Seal of Blood is the superior skill. First is it scales better with haste. Haste doesn't affect dots in the Burning Crusade, so more haste for vengeance just means getting to 5 stacks quicker, so it scales very poorly. And number 2 is that the Seal of Blood does more damage, and that self-inflicted damage is actually a benefit due to the passive Paladin's kit called Spiritual Attunement, which restores 10% mana of healing taken. This doesn't work with overhealing past a certain patch. It has to be actual damage healed, so the Seal of Blood also gives an edge in mana regeneration, which is important because seal twisting is still a thing in the Burning Crusade. If you don't know, you basically time your melee swings with changing seals, so you get the benefits of both. It's more damage, but it's taxing on your mana, so it's a pretty big deal. The discrepancy is so large that some private servers actually share the spell between factions, and people are calling for the same for the official re-release, but we don't know what Blizzard will do yet. As I said in my class picking guide, I'm pretty sure they'll keep it faction specific because they've been very hands-off with Classic overall, but who knows, I could be wrong. Definitely something to look up before playing for all of you Paladins out there. But that's pretty much it. That was a mouthful. I thought that this video would be 10 minutes, but here we are. I wanted to be pretty thorough though. I in no way claim I'm all-knowing in this stuff, and I'm sure people will have some things I missed or maybe got wrong in the comments, so definitely give those a read as well, as I'm sure they'll be helpful. As I mentioned, I did make a full detailed class picking guide in the same format as this one if you have an hour to spare, and soon I'll also cover professions, so if you're undecided with all that stuff, maybe those videos can help push you in the right direction. I'll have them linked in the description. Ultimately though, I hope you enjoyed the video, and you came out with more than you came in with, and you had a good time. Like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.